Welcome back to Visceral, and oh boy, today we're taking a look at Overnight Sensation from Frank Zappa and the Mothers of Invention. Where do we even begin with Frank Zappa? In fact, I won't even try to give you a complete retrospective of Frank Zappa and his career. Obviously, this is a important musician, I think one of the most important American musicians ever, just for some of the records he's made, the way he did things, even some of the philosophy that he brought in, all that I might not share with him personally, but I think plays an important role in the development of rock and roll music from what it was in the 50s. We'll have to cover some of Frank Zappa's earlier records another day. I think some of them, We're Just in It for the Money, is one of the best 60s records of all time. But what's really interesting about Frank Zappa, if you're not that familiar with his career, is that I think from an outsider's perspective, you just looked at Frank Zappa or you looked at his record covers, or even if you listened to some of the music, you might think, oh, well, this is just a guy who was part of the late 1960s. This is someone who was into psychedelics, who was into hippie culture, really pushing it and sticking it to the man and challenging society. And some of those things are true, but others are not. That Frank Zappa, was well known. He's deceased now, was well known for being someone who was not a drinker, didn't use drugs. He was kind of a workaholic, and he was really into experimental music and trying to come up with things that were different. He came at a good time in the music industry because in the late 60s, there was record labels that were signing bands who were doing just that, who were trying to do psychedelic music and try to take things in new directions. But Frank Zappa always had kind of a cynical look at the larger music community that he was placed in. That record that I briefly mentioned before, We're Only in It for the Money, is such a wonderful statement about 60s culture that's often left out of our very romantic look back at it. When we think of the Summer of Love in San Francisco and, flowers in your hair and all that stuff, that record actually looks at, it's more about drug abuse and the government hurting people. In fact, there's a song on there that is almost prolific before the Kent State Massacre, where he talks about the police are killing a bunch of people and people who are watching it on TV think, that's fine because they look different. So Frank Zappa, really complicated figure. Again, we're not going to talk about all of it, but I think it's important to get that context so that when we talk about this 1973 record, One Night Sensation. So there's a lot of records that come before this, but I think this is the record that really puts Frank Zappa into a different realm, where he breaks free of some of the kind of experimentation and the weirdness of his 60s and early 70s catalog, where he was like kind of throwing stuff against the wall. This was a musician that almost every year would come out with a new record. Sometimes there'd be a new record and then a live record and then yet another piece. And he was trying to do lots of different stuff, but it really came together well on this specific album. It is a polished record as far as a Frank Zappa record goes, I should say. This is a record that if you put it on and you weren't necessarily listening to the lyrics very closely or some of his vocal delivery, you'd think this is just a big fat 70s rock and roll record. But it has all the hallmarks of Frank Zappa's great lyricism and his quirkiness and also his kind of cynical look at society. So let's jump right into the record. One of my favorite tracks is the opening song, Camarillo Brillo. And again, the lyrics that Frank Zappa can write are just incredible and I think are just really complement the music well. But it also just fits with the guitar lines that he's running through on this track. He says, "She had that Camarillo Brillo flaming out along her head. I mean her Mendocino Beano, but where some bugs had made it red." A whole record is about sex. This whole record is about, romantic encounters. Maybe I shouldn't say romantic encounters. It's about sex. Even the cover of the record is kind of famous for that as well. But Frank Zappa, being the weird guy that he is, these are not romantic songs. This is not make-out music. If this is a look at sex, it's not going to be always the most pleasant. In fact, it's going to be kind of on the grosser end of things, or just how life can be, I guess, if you're living on the margins of society and you're a rock and roll star, but you're not exactly, someone who's playing in Led Zeppelin, you're not Robert Plant or something like that.
And carried on without a comma. that she was someone I should know. She had a snake for a pet and an amulet, and she was breeding a dwarf, but she wasn't done yet. She had gray-green skin, a doll with a pin. I told her she was alright, but I couldn't come in. I could come in right then.
The second track off the record is also my second favorite song, I Am the Slime, and this is a commentary on TV culture and just mass media and how it manipulates people. Although it was written in 1973, because of all the stuff that's been happening in this country, the way the media seems to influence people in really negative ways, I'm thinking particularly about cable news channels. I think the lyrics that he provides here are some of the most direct and poignant and still, unfortunately, quite true.
I am gross and perverted. I'm obsessed and deranged. I have existed for years, but very little has changed.
An interesting tidbit about this record is that Tina Turner is one of the singers on it. And Ike Turner, who was her manager and lover, initially had said, okay, sure, you know, we could get my band, my musicians, Tina Turner, and they can help contribute on this record. When he actually heard what he was doing with the singers and the music that actually came out, he said, what the hell is this? And then demanded that their names not be posted on this record anywhere, which is pretty unfortunate because Tina Turner, an incredible voice, and she does a great job on this third track, Dirty Love.
Give me your dirty love. I don't believe you've never seen his book before. I don't need no consolation. I don't want your reservation. I only got one destination, and that's your dirty love.
On the other side of the album is also a great song, and one that I think bridges the gap between some of his zanier, quirkier experimentation or just kind of soloing from his late 60s and early 70s output to this new, cleaner approach to making music. And it's a track called Zombie Wolf. Zappa's catalog, it is daunting. I have tried to listen to everything. Thankfully, we live in the era where if you go into Spotify, you can pretty much see every one of his major records that he's released. I can't say I'm 100% through everything, but in the last 15 years, I've really tried to commit myself to learning about some of his some of these eras in his career that I'm not as familiar with. I was really familiar with his early 60s stuff up through Hot Rats, and then it was kind of right about there I dropped off. And when I finally came upon this record, I thought, this is really the Zappa that people should know. This is the Zappa. If you are not familiar with any of his records, start with this one, because I think you're going to get hooked with these great guitar licks, great drumming, great, just great structure all around, but also see what makes him creative about his lyrics and his lyrical approach to singing. So that's it for today, folks. Make sure you give us a comment down below. Tell us, what do you think of Frank Zappa? What are his best records? What's the stuff that people seem to ignore that maybe is a real gem in his catalog that we should listen to? And just tell us about any other music that you're listening to right now. We'd love to hear it. So until next time.